Good morning. Today is the festival of the Nativity of Our Lady, and it is also the 14th Sunday after Trinity, with the intent of renewal of heart. Now, this is actually quite an appropriate combination of intents, particularly if we take into account today's Gospel, which tells us a beautiful story about a renewal of heart that happened between Our Lady Mary and Elizabeth. We also have a very nice collect and epistle for today, which tells us about wisdom. And wisdom is often associated with Our Lady Mary, whose birth we celebrate today. And I'll explain how this works by going through our collect and epistle and our gospel. So, starting always with our collect, we start by thanking the sweet and laudable pattern set before us by the Holy Lady Mary, who we have ever held up as a bright example of purity and godly life. And we go on in the collect to pray that there may shine forth within us the light of ever-growing purity and holiness. So here we combine a number of different themes. We talk about purity and a godly life. And we also talk about the sweet and laudable pattern that our Holy Lady Mary set before us. So what exactly is this pattern? Now, we need only to think about for a moment about the example that Mary gave. Mary was visited by an angel and told that she would bear God's child. And instead of disbelieving or trying to fight against this, she accepted God's will and worked in accordance with it and lived a life of purity and raised the Son of God. This demonstrates a great amount of wisdom in that she didn't try and fight against God's will or act against the path that God had set forth before her. Instead, she accepted her place in the world and she helped to fulfill God's plan. And this collect also talks about light. And now light is something that we mention often in our church. And indeed, for today, we are using white orpheries and white colours. And the reason for that is that we are celebrating a festival of a saint, namely Our Lady, who was not a martyr. We often use this colour when we celebrate such feasts. We also use this colour on at Christmas and on festivals of angels. And this colour in our liturgy, it represents the synthesis of all other colours, and it also represents joy, which is something that is discussed in our gospel, which I'll move on to shortly. And here light is important because light also represents wisdom, and in particular, this is actually built into our culture quite strongly. Indeed, even in our language, with words such as illumination and enlightenment, which talk about knowledge and wisdom. So what is this wisdom, and what kind of wisdom are we talking about? This wisdom is actually described in detail in the epistle for today. This epistle is actually a bit of a rare gem among our chosen epistles, because most of our chosen epistles are from the New Testament, but this one is actually quite a beautiful passage from the Book of Proverbs, which is from the Old Testament. And the Book of Proverbs was allegedly written by King Solomon. King Solomon was known for being a very, very wise king. There's a very famous story about how King Solomon quite wisely settled a dispute between two women who both wanted a child. And he said that, well, the child shall be cut in half and each woman should receive half. And of course, the woman that said, no, don't do that, he knew that must have been the child's true mother. So she ended up with the child. King Solomon also famously was asked by God for a wish, and he chose wisdom. He asked for nothing else but wisdom to rule over his people wisely and justly. And God granted him this wisdom, and also much more. He also granted him great riches, fame, and, well, he had by all accounts, he had a very successful and peaceful rule. Now, this passage here in the Book of Proverbs talks about the nature of wisdom. And it describes wisdom as having been there from the beginning, before the earth was. It uses some very evocative language to talk about how wisdom was there when there were no springs and before mountains were shaped. And when God prepared the heavens, wisdom was there. And it also uses this passage here, which is the face of the deep. And this is also a passage that appears in the book of Genesis. And this deep here actually refers to what we're talking about when we're talking about this wisdom. It is a concept of something primordial, something from which all creation actually was brought forth by God. And this deep also tells us a little something about what we mean when we talk about this wisdom. We're not talking about mental knowledge or mathematics or, counting or language. What we're talking about here is something much deeper, something that comes from the heart, something that existed long before creation. And it is this heart wisdom that Mary embodied. She wasn't known for, being great at mathematics or for writing pieces of literature, but what she was known for was having a very, very strong heart wisdom and being able to tap into this heart wisdom in order to allow it to guide her life. And this is the example that we are celebrating today on the Feast of the Nativity of Our Lady. And this wisdom, when we tap into it, it can actually bring us joy because it allows us to live our life in accordance with God's plan. And this joy is exemplified in today's Gospel. The Gospel is from the book of Luke and it's from the first chapter, in fact, and it begins at the 39th verse. And it tells the story of how Mary visited her cousin, Elizabeth. And now, both Mary and Elizabeth had something in common in that they both had a seemingly miraculous conception. Mary was pregnant with the Son of God, and Elizabeth was barren for a long time, but eventually became pregnant. And she actually gave birth to John the Baptist. And it's actually interesting because in this story, we actually have all three of the biblical figures whose nativities we actually celebrate in our church. We have Mary, we have John the Baptist, and we also have Jesus, who Mary is carrying. And in this story, apparently when Mary visited Elizabeth, Elizabeth was so overtaken with the Holy Ghost that the babe that was in her leapt with joy. And so it tells a story of some very miraculous events and the joy that Mary and Elizabeth and, of course, the babies that they were carrying felt at those events. Now, whether we believe this story literally or we just take into account the symbolism, it is still a very powerful story of renewal of heart. Because here we have two women, who apparently had miraculous conceptions and who felt joy and whose hearts were renewed at these events. So I encourage you to actually consider these things and to engage in some prayer, meditation, and try and tap into this deeper heart wisdom, because this may also help you to find some renewal of heart and some joy. Thank you.